Welcome to the latest episode of Quest for Twice. Today is April 15th. It's an exciting time for me because this is the beginning of the earnings season, and this is where I can see if my investment is on track. So in this episode, I'm going to cover the companies I own and the investment thesis behind most of the companies I own. So this is a snapshot of my portfolio at the end of March. This 3x3 matrix shows the percentage of my portfolio in the combination of valuation versus size of the company. Before I get started, let's review an important ratio, that is enterprise value over EBITDA. The reason I look at the EBITDA is that stands for earning before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization, and that's a proxy for cash flow. So, and the EV is the enterprise value. So by looking at this ratio, we can get a sense on how expensive or the valuation level of the company. And this chart has a lot of information because it breaks down the EV over EBITDA ratio for the different sectors of S&P 500 and comparing those ratios for two time instances in 2019 and now in April of 2021. So it has a lot of information, and I will return back to this chart in the future. But for now, I just want to show this as a reference when I discuss the valuation of the different companies I own. Adcore is one of my key holdings. It makes electric conduits and metal fasteners. The reason I made the electric conduits bold is because that's the majority of Adcore's EBITDA. Its current EV over EBITDA ratio is about 10 compared to 14 for the industrial companies. So it's undervalued. And to make things even better, it has a growth potential from energy transition because energy transition will need to electrify almost everything, which leads to more demand for electric conduits. I also look at the company's competitive strength because when there is higher demand, we need to understand if the company will keep its market share or there will be new entrants into the market and take away the market share. For Adcore, its competitive position is very strong. It's immune from overseas imports because of high freight cost and long lead item that will deter overseas manufacturing and shipping. It has a national manufacturing and distribution network and gains operational leverage. And that strength is reflected in this ratio. ROIC. It stands for return on invested capital. It's about 17%, indicates multi-business. It's not very capital intensive. So it spends actually about 10% of its EBITDA on organic capital. And it has a fairly established track record of wise M&A. So I feel very comfortable with holding Adcore despite it's currently about 37% of my portfolio. I also hold a small position in Emerson. Emerson makes automation, which is its main profit driver, and also HVAC components and home improvement tools. Its current EV over EBITDA ratio is about 17 compared to 14 for the industrial companies. However, I still consider Emerson as fair valued. The reason being that it has pretty strong growth potential as well as a very strong competitive strength. Its growth potential comes also from energy transition because electrification usually leads to more automation opportunities. And also, all companies have a drive to increase productivity, and usually productivity comes from more automation and machine replacing labor. It'll especially true if inflation picks up, and the companies will be even under greater pressure to reduce labor cost. And the main avenue to achieve reduction in labor cost is through productivity gain and automations. Its competitive strength is very strong as a leading global automation provider. And it has a global manufacturing and distribution network against a very strong operation leverage. That competitive strength is reflected in its ROIC. It's about 17%, indicating very wide moat. Its organic capital is also about 10% of its EBITDA. In 2020, it has excessive free cash flow, and Amazon made a few sizable acquisitions. To me, that reflects a very wise use of capital because during market downturn, good companies were for sale, and Amazon had the cash and wisdom to take advantage of those opportunities. I also consider Ingredion as a key holding. This company makes commodity and specialty food ingredients, for example, sugar substitutes and plant-based protein. Its EV over EBITDA ratio is about 10, compared to 13 for consumer defensive companies, so it's undervalued. And it also comes with a fairly good growth potential, because healthy eating is a worldwide trend, and that will lead to more demand for the specialty ingredients. For example, the desire to eat less sugar due to concerns from diabetes, and also the desire to eat more plant-based protein compared to animal-based protein for health benefits. However, there is an additional driver that has not been widely reported. That is because of meat-based protein has a very high greenhouse gas intensity. So if the society is serious about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, then just looking at the electric vehicles and green power generations will not be enough. Farming and diet has to be part of that solution. As a result, I believe there is a growth potential for plant-based protein as an initiative to reduce man-made greenhouse gas emissions. Ingredion has a fairly strong competitive strength, maybe not as strong as Amazon and Adcore, but it's still one of the leading manufacturers of specialty ingredients. It also has a global manufacturing and distribution network. Its return on invested capital is about 10%, so indicating some moat, not as wide as Amazon, but that's obscured by its commodity ingredient business, because by definition, a commodity business has no moat. And that's about half of ingredients EBITDA. But the other half from specialty ingredients is fairly moaty, and as a result, the average return on invested capital is about 10%, given that the ingredient wants to invest capital to grow its specialty ingredients. So I think that's a good move and will have a high return on those invested capitals. And actually, Ingredion is investing about 30% of EBITDA as an organic capital.
So because it sees a growth opportunity and is investing into that, I'm optimistic about that investment. Ingredion also made acquisitions in 2020, and that's also a wise use of capital during market downturn. I also hold IEC Electronics. This is a very interesting company because it's very different from Atco Emerson and Ingredion. IEC is an electronic manufacturing service provider based in New York. And the reason I think it's very interesting because it's very small. It's a micro cap with an annual revenue about $180 million. However, it has a pretty high growth rate of 22% averaged over the last 3 years. So its current EV over EBITDA is about 13 compared to 14 for industrial companies. So it's undervalued for the growth rate. And of course, for any growth company, the key risk is if the company can keep up with the historical growth rate. Only time will tell. It has a growth potential from a tailwind of reshoring of manufacturing. In the last couple of years, especially in 2020, companies realized that when they offshore manufacturing, and they put more risks on the supply chain. So as a result, now there is a trend to reshore some of the manufacturing, and I think IEC is positioned to benefit from that. Its competitive strength is quite uncertain because it's very small compared to its larger peers. And it has a return on invested capital ratio about 11%, indicating potential moat. But for a company so small, and I think the business can be volatile. So I would say it's very uncertain if it has any competitive strength. It invests about 30% of its EBITDA in organic capital. In the last 2 years, it built, then it's in the process of moving into new facilities. I think that's an indication of management confidence in its future business. So I'm looking forward to its quarterly earning update to see if it's on track. And I own 2 midstream oil and gas transporters in Energy Transfer and Kinder Morgan. They are also very different from the other companies because speaking of growth potential, their growth may be negative due to energy transition away from fossil fuel to renewable energy. So that's a big topic I'm not going to cover here. In the past, I have done very detailed review of the energy transition, the pace and the shape of the energy transition. So I'm not going to cover here, but I do want to point out that 60% of Kinder Morgan EBITDA is from natural gas. And I think that's a less threat from energy transition comparing to oil. And also, 10% of Kinder Morgan's EBITDA is from CO2, and that is actually a growth opportunity. As a result, I think Kinder Morgan faces a smaller threat from energy transition compared to energy transfer. And that may be part of the reasons to explain the difference in their EV over EBITDA ratio. Kinder Morgan is about 10.4, while Energy Transfer is about 7. Because of the risk from energy transition, so I look at those companies' cash flow very carefully, and the key metric is the DCF. That is a distributable cash flow. That's cash left after interest is paid and the tax is paid, and also maintenance capital has been spent. So Kinder Morgan 2021 DCF is about 4.4 billion, and out of that will be used to pay capex, dividend. And Energy Transfer has about 6 billion in the forecast DCF for 2021. For capital, both Kinder Morgan and the Energy Transfer is forecasting half as much as the capital they spent in 2020. So Kinder Morgan is 0.8 billion, and the Energy Transfer is about 1.5 billion. And that's significantly less than their DCF. And they also pay sizable dividend. So Kinder Morgan will pay about 2.5 billion, and the Energy Transfer will pay 1.7 billion. So if we add those up, that's still less than their DCF respectively. As a result, they have a free cash flow after dividend and the capex are paid. So Kinder Morgan will have about 1.1 billion, and the Energy Transfer will have 2.9 billion. So they are generating a lot of cash, and that's why those are the classic value investing plays. I also have 3 more stocks. One is Berkshire Hathaway, whose CEO is Warren Buffett. Berkshire Hathaway is very large and complex for me to evaluate and understand, really. I'm treating it as a proxy for S&P 500 with more exposure to old economy, because Berkshire Hathaway has a much smaller exposure to the technology sector. I also own Methode Electronics and Core Lab. I'm not going to cover those 2 companies here because they are subject of deep dives in the future. So here we go. I covered the investment thesis for my main holdings. And this is really a light touch. Once the companies report their quarterly earnings, I will devote a lot more time and review the details of their business, compare their latest update with the initial investment thesis. Until next time, happy investing.